Today, we're going to dive into a story about a dream. Not just one person's dream, but a dream that millions of people shared for their nation. A dream called the People's Dream.
To really understand a story about freedom, you have to start with its exact opposite. And for India, that story begins in a really dark place, under the shadow of foreign rule.
Our source material doesn't beat around the bush at all. It puts it in these really stark, simple terms. The people were slaves, in their own country. Now that's a powerful and heavy way to start, and it really sets the stage for the incredible struggle that's about to unfold.
But what does that actually mean day to day? Well, it meant living a life where you had almost no basic rights. Imagine not being free to say what you think or write what you believe. You couldn't even choose your own leaders. All the laws, they were made by someone else, an outside power, and your only job was to follow orders. It was a total lack of control over your own life.
But here's the thing. Even in the deepest, darkest moments, voices of defiance always start to rise up. And from all over the country, a new sound started to get louder and louder, the voice of freedom.
So who were these voices? Well, you had leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, Nehru, Bhagat Singh, and Subhash Chandra Bose, who became the faces of the movement. But, and this is so important, they weren't alone, not by a long shot. They were joined by thousands, literally thousands of other revolutionaries, and that's what turned this into a real movement of the people.
And if you want to boil the entire movement down to one core idea, this quote from Mahatma Gandhi absolutely nails it. The goal wasn't just to swap out one ruler for another. It was about a fundamental shift in ownership. The idea was simple. India must belong to the people of India.
Okay, so how did they fight for this idea? This is where it gets really interesting. They didn't use armies and weapons. Their tools were ideas. Ahimsa, the path of nonviolence, and satyagraha, a really powerful form of civil disobedience. I mean, what a radical strategy. It took immense courage, and it completely flipped the script on their rulers. You had millions of people willingly going to jail, and their only weapons were their beliefs.
After decades of this struggle, of all the sacrifice and sheer determination, that long, dark night was finally coming to an end. A new dawn was just on the horizon. And here it is, that historic moment. On August 15, 1947, India finally achieved its independence. The dream that generations had held on to for so long was now real. But right after the celebration, a huge new challenge popped up. So, freedom was won. Great. But now, they had to answer the most important question of all. How are we actually going to run this country?
Think about it. The British were gone, which left this huge power vacuum. So, who was going to fill it? This wasn't just a practical problem. It was a question that was going to define the very soul of this new nation. The usual options were right there on the table. History would suggest, okay, a new king takes the throne, or maybe a powerful general from the army would just take control. These were the old, familiar ways of doing things. But India decided to reject them both.
Instead, India chose a path that was truly revolutionary for its time, a path that would become a model for so many others. They chose the path of Janta Ka Raj, the people's rule.
And how do you bring an idea like the people's rule to life? Well, the answer was to create a constitution, a foundational document, a rule book written by Indians for Indians that would spell out exactly how this new nation was going to work.
Getting freedom in 1947 was, of course, the massive first step, but in many ways, the real climax of the journey came a few years later, on January 26, 1950. That was the day India's new constitution officially went into effect, and the nation was formally declared a democratic republic.
So what does that fancy term, democratic republic, actually mean? It's pretty simple, really. Democratic means the power is with the people, and republic means the head of state is an elected president, not some king who inherits the job. At its heart, it was a promise. Every single citizen would get the right to vote, putting the power directly into their hands.
So after all that struggle, the final answer to that big question, who's going to rule, was incredibly clear. No king, no Englishman. The people of India will run India. That was the dream, and that was the promise that was finally fulfilled.
But the story doesn't just end there in the history books. The source material leaves us with one last, really vital message. It shifts from the past right into the present, and it's all about our responsibility. And to really get a grip on that responsibility, we have to understand the cost. We don't know the exact number, but it's massive. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of sacrifices that were made just to build this system of self-rule. And this, right here, is the ultimate lesson. This democracy,
this right we have to choose our own future, it wasn't some kind of gift. It was earned. It was built on a foundation of unbelievable sacrifice by the people who came before us.
Which leaves all of us with one final, very powerful question. If the price of getting this freedom was so incredibly high, then what's the price of keeping it? The source seems to suggest that the answer has to do with us, with our duty to protect the very thing that was won at such a dear cost. It's really something to think about.